The NBA is so interesting. There's always these topics. And again, another head coaching carousel happens. The Minnesota Timberwolves just fired Ryan Saunders a couple days ago, but that's not what makes this noteworthy. They hired Chris Finch to be the new head coach, a former assistant with the Timberwolves, but this isn't what makes this a topic of discussion. So Karl-Anthony-Towns, the Timberwolves' best player, came out yesterday and said that he was in shock when he heard the news. In fact, he found out through the media after the Timberwolves lost to the New York Knicks, suffering their fourth straight defeat. And he said he apparently was in shock by the decision. So we've seen numerous players come out and voice their frustrations, voice their concerns, especially some more prominent players like Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum call into question why more African-American head coaches are not coaching in the NBA. Right now, there are only 7 black head coaches in the NBA. And so the Timberwolves' assistant, their very own assistant, David Vanderpool, is an assistant with the Minnesota Timberwolves, and CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard questioned why was he overlooked, right? And one of the things that I've always contended, and it's quite obvious, is NBA players are the most empowered players and stars in any sports league, in any sports team. Obviously, a sport like golf, tennis are individualistic sports. Everything is predicated on them. It's directly attributed to them and their success. But in the NBA, basketball players are way more empowered than players in any other sport, and specifically NBA stars. They wield the most power, and they carry significantly more clout than any other star in a sport. That includes, in my opinion, quarterbacks in the NFL. And so, given that that is kind of a maxim now, if you are the Minnesota Timberwolves, and just take the LA Clippers, for example, you look at Kawhi Leonard and the fact that the Clippers tried to, they signed him a couple summers ago, but they traded for Paul George. But Kawhi Leonard told them, hey, if you don't get Paul George, I'm not coming. And so the Clippers moved heaven and earth to trade for Paul George. They gave away Shai Gilgeous-Alexander, Danilo Gallinari, 5 first-round picks, 2 pick swaps to acquire Paul George. And so it shows that if you are a star, your opinion can have a profound impact on what your organization does. Because the one thing that NBA players are starting to understand and exploit now is the advantage they have with regard to the power dynamic between them and the front office. Because the smart front offices, the smart owners, are acutely aware and recognize the power that the players have, and that if these teams want to retain these NBA stars in free agency, if they want to attract other stars, if they want to still be relevant and compete for NBA titles, they need to acquiesce to players' demands. That's the reality. Steve Nash, as talented as an NBA player that he was, regardless of his credentials and his accomplishments, he would not be the head coach of the Brooklyn Nets if Kevin Durant and Kyrie didn't sign off on that trade, on that hiring. Frank Vogel would not be the head coach of the Lakers if LeBron put a kibosh on that, rather. The Rockets wouldn't have went all out to try and pursue and trade for Russell Westbrook, Chris Paul, or Dwight Howard if James Harden didn't highly encourage them to do so. These things wouldn't happen. So there's a reason why stars in the NBA are consulted about everything, because the players recognize and the stars recognize their power, and the ownership understands, and the owners understand the clout that they carry. And so if you're the Timberwolves, it's not that hiring Chris Finch was a bad hire. This is a guy who's obviously paid his dues. He's been a professional head coach for 24 years. He was a coach in Europe for over 10 years. He coached the D League at the time. The NBA G League was referred to back then as the D League. He's been an assistant coach on the Timberwolves' bench for over 10 years. So he's paid his dues. And I'm not saying he's not going to be a good coach, and he very well may be, and he very well may have a profound impact on Karl-Anthony-Towns. But the fact that you didn't consult Karl-Anthony-Towns beforehand is a major misstep, because here you have a guy in Karl-Anthony-Towns. Now, say what you want about their record. I understand they have the worst record in the Western Conference right now, but Karl-Anthony-Towns is a star, and he's the only semblance and vestige of a future that your organization has. And so even though you traded for D'Angelo Russell, which he's a nice piece, but he's overpaid, he's not enough to entice Karl-Anthony-Towns to stay. So this was a major misstep by the organization. And again, it's not because Chris Finch isn't going to be a good head coach. He could very well be a good head coach. But the fact that you didn't consult with Karl-Anthony-Towns was the blunder that you made. Just look at the Houston Texans. Now, granted, I will admit it's not the same situation with Deshaun Watson, because they consulted with Watson and then they deliberately and in a perverse manner went behind his back and lied to him. So I'm not claiming that the Timberwolves are doing that, because they didn't even apparently go approach Karl-Anthony-Towns about the hiring. But again, what this could end up coming back, to haunt the Timberwolves, because here you had to thank your lucky stars that you landed the number 1 overall pick a couple years ago. You were able to draft Karl-Anthony-Towns. He's expressed interest in wanting to remain in Minnesota and stay with the Timberwolves. And if this organization wanted to increase their likelihood of retaining him in free agency, which is coming up in a couple seasons, they should have consulted with him. And this is what Karl-Anthony-Towns said. As a man of color myself, you would love to see more coaches that resemble what me and you look like on the sidelines. But you've got to support the organization in everything you do and understand. I understand how everything is, but at the end of the day, the organization made the choice that they felt was best for this organization, and you've got to be professional in all of this. Now, this doesn't sound like someone to me who was fully on board with the decision. This tone doesn't ring true to me. This bottle of wine doesn't have notes of grape in it. This doesn't sound like someone that was consulted who knew about the entire process before hiring Chris Finch. And I understand that Karl-Anthony-Towns has expressed his desire to remain in Minnesota, and that's a positive. But this is a guy who Finch is now the 4th head coach for Minnesota since Karl-Anthony-Towns was drafted in 2015 and 2016 in that season. That's the most in the NBA. So I understand he wants to stay there, but not the best look if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves.